With those announcements made, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Today's webinar is titled Native American and Research Communities Uniting to Fight Alzheimer's Disease. Our presenters today are Dr. Carrie Gleason and Wesley Martin. Dr. Carrie Gleason is a researcher and clinician whose work focuses on early identification of and intervention for memory disorders in underserved communities. She is interested in identifying modifiable risk factors for Alzheimer's disease in African American and Native Americans, groups traditionally underrepresented in research. She is the principal or co-investigator on numerous research projects examining these risk factors. Findings from her research projects have resulted in more than 50 scholarly articles and 4 book chapters. Additionally, she serves as co-leader of the Minority Recruitment Satellite Program of the Wisconsin's Alzheimer's Disease Research Center and leader of the Neuropsychology Service. Wesley Martin is an advocate for Alzheimer's disease research in partnership with Native American communities. He is a former law practitioner in Keshena, Wisconsin, bringing his experience in law to help small business owners and knowledge of federal, state, and Bureau of Indian Affairs programs to inform community programming. Although enrolled at Oneida, Mr. Martin is a Menominee and Chippewa heritage as well, and has seen firsthand the immense value in intertribal and tribal-non-tribal partnerships. He is prized for his knowledge of tribal program development, policy, and procedure and grant writing. Special interests include economic development, indigenous herbal medicinal knowledge, and social programs on Native American reservations. As a veteran, Mr. Martin is also proud to contribute to veteran-focused support programming in Indian country. I'd like to thank these 2 presenters for giving their time to share their knowledge with us. And Carrie, I'll turn it over to you to provide an introduction to today's topic.
Hey, all right. Thank you, Julie. I want to thank you also for the option or the invitation, to present today. It's a real honor to tell you about our journey and how we've grown as a collaboration, our 2 programs. So I will go ahead and we'll start with our first slide to describe sort of our journey in this process. So there were some key players, of course. I'll tell you about from the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. We had some key players who were active in this process. This wouldn't have happened without their help. And I'll let my partner here, Mr. Martin, describe some of the key players at the Oneida Nation.
Thank you, Terry. I first want to mention on that introduction, boy, I didn't even know who I was, but it sounded good. When we started this, what happened was a number of the Anacola board and Oneida members were going down to the Alzheimer's Association meeting in the Wisconsin Dells, and one of the Anacola members at that time noticed Mike Hill as a member that there was no information on Native Americans, and he voiced that concern to the people at the Alzheimer's Association meeting. And eventually, when we did, they did try to reach out then to some, and that's when we ran at that meeting following that. I believe it was a year later or so. We accidentally ran into Carrie and Dorothy, and they're telling us about what their project was. We invited them to Oneida. We also invited them to participate in a national conference in Arizona by the Banner Group, and which they heard. And we again continued our dialogue with them, and we will explore that from there. And mainly, we will be talking about their presentation at Oneida at a day later. So, turn back to Carrie.
Yeah. All right. So, when we started our conversation between the 2 organizations, it didn't take long before we realized that there were many misunderstandings on both sides of this conversation. So Wes described to me some of the narratives in Indian country around dementia. Would you like to elaborate, please?
Well, and as we're so-called most of a reservation Indian most of my life, except for times in the service and live in other parts, I still live. My connection with other reservations throughout the country. And we used to refer to Alzheimer's as old-timers. And when I seen this word dementia, that actually was, when we talked about it, was actually a foreign word to me. I knew of dementia, but never, associated with Alzheimer's, things like that. And so our conversation with Dorothy and Carrie, acknowledging that Alzheimer's was a form of dementia, and I think 62 other forms of dementia. So that's been what in our conversations and continues to be just what dementia means and how can we get that information to the reservation people here in Wichita. Okay, yeah. And so what we, Carrie and Dorothy came up to everybody to come up to Oneida. They visited the meal site, and there was some, we opened it up to the public to come there, and we talked about Alzheimer's. And there was a turnout there. Dorothy made a comment after it that usually when they did the presentation, they usually went 15 to a half hour. That session at Anna John at the meal site lasted pretty close, almost 3 hours. And the discussions that were and questions and all that there was a concern about it. And one of the things I learned that day, and it was really, to me, a question I had, and it had been bothering me when I used to, I thought I was losing my memory, going crazy, with a simple question. I couldn't remember people's names. I knew them. I'd look at them. I knew them, but I couldn't remember their names. And eventually I did get their name. But that was a concern. I thought I was losing it. So when Dorothy and them came and I mentioned it to them about my concerns and that, and they said, you know what? He said, that's just a process of growing old. And that answer was a big relief to me because I thought I was forgetting little minor things that I would say I'm going to do something, I'd forget to do it, remember it later. And as Dorothy did. So this really got my interest, and I thought about it. Later on, I was telling Carrie and Dorothy, if this is I had a concern about it, and many other people in the Indian country have the same concern. And I was scared because I didn't want to tell anybody about it. I didn't want to tell anybody. I thought I was losing it with thinking that they'll think I'm going crazy or whatever. So once I learned that, I said, we need to get this out in Indian country because if that's the way I'm feeling, and many other Native people out there, because there was some questions, not only added at that meal site that day about themselves, but there was questions about their parents, other members, friends, of how they were reacting to things, especially the elders of their parents, and one of them was like, I think she asked, my mom will ask me a question, and 10 or 15 minutes later, she asked me the same question. And Dorothy and them addressed that, and so that is, I thought of, and I said, we got to get this out in Indian country. We've been developing, trying to reach out to the other, all the 11 tribes in Wisconsin, and go through the various Native programs, the Glenea, the Great Lakes Native American, Native American program, the Commission on Aging Directors, and the clinic directors in Wisconsin. So, and there's been a great, I guess, acknowledgement that they want this to go forward and they're interested in hosting it. So I will then turn it back to Carrie as we go through the slide presentation.
Well, it was pretty clear early on that there was a great deal of interest in learning more about Alzheimer's disease in the Oneida community. And as Mr. Martin described, there was some questions that were perhaps held close for fear of what people would find out. Am I losing my mind, for example? And also just the ability to reach caregivers, those people caring for older adults who have dementia. The tools that are needed to care for that person weren't available, again, in part because not knowing when to ask for help or what type of help to ask for. So, one of the things is I began to talk to my community. So in the research community, I realized that there were many myths in that community as well. And maybe some of you who work in medical fields hear this as well, that these actually, and these of course are not true, but these were things that I heard when I began to talk to colleagues about outreach to the Native American community around Alzheimer's disease. I was told that Native Americans that they don't in general live long enough to develop dementia. I'll show you some data later on that show that that's not true, that Native Americans are in fact at increased risk for dementia compared to Caucasians. And that I was also told that most dementias in Native American Indian country are alcohol related. Again, not true. And that I was also told that Native Americans will not participate in research, so that it's an impossible task to recruit Native Americans into research. And again, we're finding this to be a myth as well. Again, we in these very beginning conversations, it became pretty clear early on that both sides really were hungry for or interested in and willing to invest in order to answer some key questions. As Mr. Martin mentioned, one of the very first questions that sparked this was the question of where's the research on dementia in Native Americans? And the simple answer is that there were small pockets here and there. There had been people who had been doing this, but there wasn't a whole lot of large-scale approaches to understand how dementia affects Native Americans. So we fairly quickly recognized the need for more work in this area. So I am part of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. I'm part of the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. These centers are located throughout the country. There's a total of 32 centers, and they're always at universities or institutions that have a strong academic background, and they're funded by the National Institutes of Health. So these are federal organizations, highly competitive to get one of these centers. And each center is supposed to contribute unique information to solve the influence or solve the effects of Alzheimer's disease on families and patients. So as part of our center work, we send data to a national center in the state of Washington. And that national center is called the National Alzheimer's Disease Coordinating Center. And the National Alzheimer's Disease Coordinating Center, or NAC, pulls together those data, and the goal of doing this is that we can speed the process of developing treatment and prevention. We can provide education to communities. We can speed the research process, help investigators to recruit and retain individuals in research studies, and we can provide outreach to groups underrepresented in research. So the goal for this project is to develop a representative sample so that we are including people who are affected by the disease, and we are representing the U.S. population in general. So I just want to give you some, I have a poll question here. So our current NAC enrollment, we are at over 35,000 individuals are enrolled in that NAC data set. And I'd like you to just think, I'm going to set this up by telling you that the U.S. population is approximately 7% African American, and, or excuse me, 12% African American, and the NAC enrollment for African Americans is at about 13%. Again, NAC's goal is to make special efforts into groups underrepresented in research. So again, 12% of the population is African American, 13% enrollment in NAC. The Native American population in the U.S. identifies just under 2%, self-identify as Native American. So I'd like you to go ahead and guess the number of individuals of 35,000 who are currently enrolled in the NAC. So it looks like people are filling out the poll right now. So we'll give it a little time. So Julie, I'll let you decide when we should end the poll here.
Okay, we'll just give it a few more seconds. It looks like the majority of folks signed on today have already given a response. So just a couple more seconds, Karen, and you can go ahead and move on.
So I just press the advance button to move forward then?
Yes.
Okay, so 23 of you responded, fewer than 200 people, and you would be right. Unfortunately, if you look at our actual numbers, Okay, so our actual numbers of the individuals who are self-identified, as I mentioned, we've recruited, or 13% of the population identifies as Black, and we're really at close to 12.5%. We're about that. We're doing really well with our recruitment for African Americans. However, if you look at our recruitment for the Native population, fewer than 200 individuals. That's 0.06% of the NAC enrollment is Native American. So it was something that, looking at these data, I recognized as a community, a member of the research community, I realized that we were not doing a good enough job in terms of our enrollment for Native Americans. And you'll see why in a few slides, why this becomes really important. So here, this is, I'll turn this back to Wes as we talk about, Wes just touched on this briefly. When we came to Oneida to the meal site and we gave a presentation, and this is what you were talking about, Wes, when we were there in May of 2015, and we gave a talk, and it was amazing, the reception. Again, it was we were easily there for 3 hours answering questions and hearing comments from the audience. If you'd like to add anything.
And the other thing that came out of that was, and I think it was already had been talked about with Marlene Summers and some, start getting into what they call a project at UWM here on testing what they're, and there's a number of them now are participating in that, and there was also another with music and memory, and they started doing that. And then through that whole project, Carrie came up, we met with people from the clinic, with Anna Koa, Lois Strong and that group, and continue to work with the Elder Commission on Aging. And we were able to eventually bring up staff from the UWM, and they did this, I forget the number of that test that they ran. And it basically gave you a showing. I took the test for my own concerns, and it gives you a score. And based upon that score, you were able to determine from this test if you had onset of dementia, if you didn't, things like that. And it was pretty good because, it gives you, but it started that process to do it. And our talking is also of trying to get this, the cultural part of it. How does this fit into the cultural part of it? In my associated Indian country, and being raised on reservations, most of our older people stay in the family unit. They are taking care of things like that. And that, to me, I believe it's sort of like a cultural type of component of Native people. And again, I mentioned that I did lived in New Mexico, and that is down there. That is one of their most cultural bases, that they take care of their elders and their children. So my enthusiasm to continue in this project has developed, and I continue that. Hopefully, that moves with the Tucanea, others, and other commission directors on reservations in Wisconsin. And we've even reached out to the population in Milwaukee. There's a large Native population in Milwaukee that hopefully that we can then also continue to work with, and any other urban populations. So it's getting the things out, getting and answering questions, and basically trying to tell people what dementia is about. There's been a great enthusiasm on the reservations, the reservation programs, the clinic directors, elder directors. So hopefully that this continues, and working with Carrie, that's a goal that we hope is. And I should note, I'm also the chair of the Native American Elder Association, and we put this as the day before our meetings, which we have every 3 months. We have a task force meeting of different projects that we're working on, elder abuse, and this has been put in dementia, has put in as part of that task force, and will continue to bring this information forward to that elder program.
Yeah. So this is so Wes was describing how we started our connection locally. We met again in Arizona, Scottsdale, Arizona, it was the inaugural National Conference on Alzheimer's Disease in Native American communities. And so I went purely as a participant just to listen, and Wes was there with several community members from Oneida, and there were many representatives from Wisconsin tribes. And it was an opportunity to sort of see what's happening on the national level. That conversations, again, this was the inaugural national conference, and that was in 2015. So you can see that even on the national level, these conversations are really just in the beginning stages. And the momentum is continuing, but it's still, and just depending on where you are, how advanced different organizations are. But there are many people now working on this topic. And our hope is to be part of this conversation and to contribute our voices to the national conversation. So, as Wes mentioned, we held a screening event. And when we came back from Arizona, one of the first things we did was we met with UNCOA. Wes now is the former chair of the UNCOA board on this reservation, and we asked them, what would you like us to do? And the sort of unanimous vote was for a memory screening event, and I worked closely with their representatives. So Lois Strong was incredibly helpful, Marlene Summers, other board members, Debbie Miller, their dementia care specialist, all were key players in helping us pull together a really successful event where we were able to go and offer the community some kind of answers. So basically, so you're not feeling like you're going this alone or that you don't understand what's happening in terms of aging, whether this is normal aging or an early part of a memory problem. We were able to go and make appropriate referrals for people who needed the evaluations, and actually for some people kind of allay their concerns about any cognitive changes they may be noticing. So we held that screening event in April. I'm going to shift gears a bit to talk about why the national focus on this group. As I mentioned early on, when I first started this conversation or talking with Native American groups here in Wisconsin, some of my colleagues told me, well, why would you pursue this? Because Native Americans don't live long enough to get dementia. Well, as it turns out, there's some recent data from 2016 from two different groups that looked at the prevalence of dementia in various ethnic and racial groups. So, if you looked at the green bars the dark green bars are African Americans, the light green bars are Native Americans, white are the light blue bar, and the darkest bar here, the dark blue bar, is Asian Americans. So if we look at Asian Americans in this case for late onset dementia, this is dementia after the age of 65, the group that's has the lowest prevalence, or incidence rates, are Asian Americans. So compared to Asian Americans, the groups at elevated risk are white in some age groups, but in general it goes back and forth. Native Americans and African Americans are the groups at greatest risk for late onset dementia. Again, this is dementia occurring after the age of 65. Still, the overall risk is still greatest for African Americans, but Native Americans, as you can see, are a close second in many age groups. Then if we consider dementia for individuals younger than the age of 65, if we look at, racial and ethnic groups, if you look at Caucasians in this case, are the comparison group. So Caucasians represent that blue vertical line, and the horizontal line represents 4 different racial or ethnic groups. And if the horizontal line crosses the vertical line, there's no statistical difference between the groups in terms of their overall odds ratio or their overall risk. So just by looking at this, you can quickly see that there are 2 groups that whose risk is elevated, statistically elevated, and those groups are African Americans, who are about 1.5, 1.6, compared to Caucasians, and Native Americans, who are looked to be about twice the risk for whites, again, for young onset or early onset dementia, again, before the age of 65. So one possibility is that there is a sort of truncated life expectancy, perhaps, and that Native Americans do, in fact, get dementia, but they're getting it younger than the age of 65. And again, seem to be at the groups at highest risk compared to others. I'll also just depart briefly from the conversation around Native American dementia and just talk generally about what is dementia. And these are oftentimes really helpful conversations. Forgive me if this is repetitive for those of you in the audience, but just generally talking about what is dementia. It's a syndrome. And it's a syndrome that we can recognize and diagnose. It's recognized by behaviors, and it has diagnostic criteria. So the diagnostic criteria include a change in cognition in 2 or more areas. It's affecting your day-to-day life. So it's causing problems in your ability to manage day-to-day tasks. It also has to be a change from your baseline. So if it's something that has always been a problem from when you were young, it's not defined as a dementia. And it can't be better explained by something else, like depression or a delirium. Alzheimer's disease, in contrast, is one of the many causes for dementia. It happens to be the most common cause, and it's something that we can recognize pretty characteristically in how it presents clinically. Alzheimer's disease has a slow, insidious onset. It declines. There's decline over time. And it has a characteristic pattern of memory and something called executive dysfunction. So again, Alzheimer's disease is one of several causes. one of the things I'd like to point out before we move on, I talk about Alzheimer's disease sometimes, and I inadvertently present it as something synonymous with dementia, and that is a mistake on my part, but it is Alzheimer's disease is a cause of dementia, again, amongst the many different types of causes. It happens to be the most common cause. If you look at it as either a single cause or in combination with some other form of dementia, it accounts for approximately 65 to 80% of dementias, depending on the estimate. So what, if we look at, again, I go back to that question, why is this important for conversations in Indian country? Let's look at the factors increasing risk for dementia and factors that decrease your risk for dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So in both cases, factors that increase your risk for dementia and Alzheimer's disease dementia are age. So the population is living longer. Genetics plays a role. But then look at these next set of factors. And these are, as Julie mentioned early on, an interest of mine are the modifiable risk factors. So things like diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, depression, head injury. If we look at the prevalence of any one of those conditions in Indian country, you will find that Native Americans are at increased risk for these common risk factors for Alzheimer's disease dementia. If we then look at the factors that mitigate risk, physical exercise, education, some possibly dietary factors, social engagement, purpose in life. And these all provide a sort of foothold to look at prevention efforts. And these are all things that could be cultivated or grown in Native communities. Again, these are oftentimes the focus already of programs in Native communities. So hopefully this makes sense now, why this would be of interest in terms of addressing a health equity concern. So again, these are just a graphic of dementia in general, not just of Alzheimer's disease, things that promote the risk for dementia and those that lower the risk. So things like early age education, social engagement, mental activity are all ways to mitigate the risk for dementia. So I'm going to turn back to Wes for this next part. As we were talking, we realized that there were so many questions that remain unanswered when it comes to dementia in the Native American population. So,
thank you, Chris. Yeah, one of the questions was that I posed right out was to Native Americans, when they were basically confined to the reservation, they brought our boarding schools this processed foods. We still get them today. We get the kamats, we get the other things, and so we have traditional foods such as game and berries, venison here in Wisconsin. And yet, very little of that is given the food that was given to us that we had to take, unless we were fortunate to be able to hunt and fish on some of the reservations. But that became does that have an effect on dementia, this processed food? That's an unanswered question. We hopefully through the research that can be answered. And then the other part was there's a push with GWAR now. They're bringing in a project on indigenous foods, and how does some of our old foods that we used to, with the wild rice, the berries, and things like that, how does that affect? Was that a cause of causing Alzheimer's or dementia? And then one of the projects that we're tying on to that is hopefully how do we find out about our herbal medicine that a lot of our tribal people had? They were processed with milkweed, with the bark, all these type of things that they had from the things that were grown on the reservations, and how did they come about having them, and how did that affect? There's many, and I tell the story about LCO one time. that one of the persons I was working with went up to El Toyota to start a flight to San Diego. And I said, what they going down is they had a whole pamphlet of medications that they could get, but they had to go across the border into Mexico to get to be treated. And these were based upon stuff that the medications generated, or the material, and it were stuff from the U.S. that they used that we could not get them in the United States. They had to go to Mexico to treat. And there's now that same story has come back to me that people go up to Canada to be treated because they can only get the medications up there. So these are the things that we're talking about. And one of the other programs that I think Marlene's involved with, when we were at that workshop in Phoenix, there was a presentation on memory and music, where they showed this one guy that was really comatose type of thing, or he was in the stage. He was in a wheelchair. He would not participate in his caregiving or whatever. Somebody accidentally put some headphones on him, and they were playing music, and that music somehow stimulated that person to come out of that thing, and it was unbelievable. As soon as they took the headphones off, he went back to that same state. But they realized that once they put it back on him, he started to come alive more or less, or something, to be able to. And so there's now a big, in Wisconsin, I know, in the nursing home, to give headsets and things like that on this music and memory. It's my hope that maybe with the nursing homes on or near the reservations where our membership goes, is to redevelop that same type of program, only using traditional music or traditional things. So, so some of these projects that we've been learning about, hopefully we can institute and use it as part of our research, and not hold the research at the end of the research period, but to use that, give that information out, tell people about different programs and projects. And Guar is very interested. But the most difficult problems that I see are these of this, and it's just not Native communities. In northern Wisconsin, upper Michigan, northern Minnesota, the lack of professional medical people is really it's unbelievable. Medical people want to stay what I call south of 29, Highway 29, because basically that's where the money is, and that's where the majority of people. But the elder population is growing up in the northern. People are moving up there to retire, and that's where most of the native reservations in Wisconsin is. So that is one of the biggest problems up there is medical personnel. And so hopefully that through the research that's bringing forth, that it can be distributed at the same time as we're going through these projects, and mindful that this project is open to anybody, any ideas, anything that we think we could use to help to define if there is Alzheimer's, dementia in Indian country. How do we recognize? How do we do it? And is there a way that we can make it culturally sensitive to meet the needs of the people on the reservation? And so there's a lot of projects. I was telling Terry, UW has other projects that are geared towards elders that we could help. One of them being is elder tree. I know Lois and them are starting a project to deliver that iPads to elder members so they can compete or communicate through that process with other people of the same interest. And so there is projects out there that we can get going that can help us in this issue with Alzheimer's. I think you have some more slides there, Terry.
I sure do, yeah. Let's just bring back the point that there's such an opportunity here to really approach this question from the research and healthcare communities in a way that we incorporate culturally sensitive approaches, ways that we draw upon culture as opposed to ignore it. And we can help build programs, for example, the music and memory, that we could incorporate native music in a project like that. We can incorporate indigenous foods in meal sites. Again, thinking this sort of as a life course issue, preventing Alzheimer's disease by thinking it from a life course perspective. So I put this slide back up just as a reminder. Every once in a while, I'll go back to the NAC website and check on the enrollment numbers and how we're doing in terms of our enrollment for Native Americans in the NAC for this large coordinating center's enrollment. Again, we have fewer than 200 individuals. It just demonstrates our need to move forward on this. So as we thought about this, Wes and I have been having conversations about how to make a really thoughtful solution. And I also thank my other collaborators at Oneida and also at Glitzy that have been really influential in terms of helping us how to understand how to approach community-based research. And we've approached this thinking about this from the service model. I mentioned again that example of going to the UNCOA board and asking, what do you want us to do, as opposed to coming in with our great ideas and asking them to adapt to us. Again, to build this service-based model, and then we ask people to participate. So if you remember, one of the myths I faced was whether or not people would participate in research, and it turns out if you address some of the barriers, compensate for travel. This is a fairly a state that requires a lot of travel. If you come down to the university, is located in the southern part of the state, and many tribal communities are more than an hour away. Make sure that you're compensating for travel, and then try to make the visits as comfortable as possible, including hiring culturally competent staff that can approach this work with a cultural humility and respect. And part of what we're doing, our work here, we invited Wes to come a week from today. He'll be giving a talk to our medical community. He's giving our grand round to talk about sort of the influence of cultural experiences on Native American health and their approach to healthcare. So we invited Wes back for a talk in a week. We have made contacts with the clinics and the elder councils, and our goal is, in responding to what the community is asking for, we're hoping to approach this first by approaching diagnostic services. In terms of Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia, having access to good, high-quality diagnostic services is absolutely essential if you're going to move forward. And as Mr. Martin mentioned, much of that is below Highway 29. So our goal, one of the first things we're going to work on is finding out what the community wants in terms of diagnostic services. Where do you want it located, and how do you want it structured? And again, improve access to caregiver resources. So destigmatizing dementia, I don't know, Wes, if you want to comment on this. A big part of what we need to do is destigmatize dementia, that it's not a person going crazy, that it's actually a disease that it's going to affect a lot of people. So,
that's, like I said, the simple question I made, a little simple, the answer that I got, the feeling I got after it was, a relief that I can't do that, because that had really bothered me, and I think as we continue on with this project, that I'm sure I'm not alone in that. But we're finding that by making the informed discussion with people on all the reservations and having this discussion about Alzheimer's, I see that there's a great enthusiasm, not just in Oneida, but throughout when I talk with Linnea. I think I forgot Carrie and Dorothy did come up and do a presentation to Linnea, and there was a lot of questions and there was discussions with that. So there is a very high interest in getting some answers, because within talking with the clinic directors, they also realized they were not doing much other than medical stuff, nothing on dementia. If they did, it was very limited. So their interest in that, in the dementia project, is great. And I appreciate the Oneida Clinic again. They're going to be doing the memory screening along with hopefully other clinics in Wisconsin on the reservation. So I think there is some questions that are, I'm not sure at what point we are and what time we have left.
Well, I think, so I'm sorry, we're supposed to speak a little bit louder, like from our feedback. So again, building trust for the research program, and also building in, as part of that, the service to the community. And I think what I'll do is I'll talk about something also really important, too, and this is conversations that Wes has brought to our attention, is we have to think about who owns the data. When we, as researchers, we oftentimes have the mindset we go into communities, we parachute in, and we collect data, and we leave, without much of a thought to give back or to using the data to actually benefit health for the community. And so one of the agreements we sort of established right from the get-go is that the data actually needs to belong to the community, and that this is something that has to benefit the community, and the community needs to be involved in every aspect of the research in terms of developing the questions to look at, as well as being benefiting from the information that we gather. And so we have incorporated for our underrepresented groups in particular, we are offering something in our program called a wraparound service, where we offer to go over very specifically, in a personalized way, what their research findings are showing, those that are clinically directed, saying that with this particular lab value, these are some recommendations we have for you. So we are now offering that as part of our research program. And I'll go ahead and switch to this is an example of how this is it's paid off, or I guess what the result is. I guess I'll put it that way. So our first couple of years of funding as a center, you can see we had a little bit of passive recruitment for Native Americans, but you can see with year 7 and year 8, there's just been a clear, without actually making a concerted effort for advertising or pushing recruitment, and we've just seen a big jump in our recruitment, our enrollment of Native Americans. So it's just been a real wonderful experience in terms of this partnership, going in with sort of a very mindful approach, and really key to this was the partnerships with the interest is an organic interest coming from the community. And in many ways, I feel sometimes I feel so fortunate to have this partnership, but also just to have the opportunity to respond to the request for the community. I think, how are we doing for time, Julie?
About 5 more minutes.
Okay. All right. So I think my last few slides, we talked about, Wes and I put together a project that we're hoping to get funded. And if we can't get it funded through the means that we sought, we plan to just chip away at this and actually do what we can with the resources we have. But I'll just maybe very briefly talk about what this supplement application. So as part of our center work, we proposed, this is a busy slide, I apologize, but we proposed to accomplish 4 different aims. The first aim was to develop an advisory board, just simply to develop a group of stakeholders who are interested in making sure to steer the work that we're doing. In the first year, we had proposed that it be an Oneida-based advisory board, and then in the second year, Wes, feeling very strongly that this is something that's going to affect all Native communities, wanted to expand in the second year to include other tribes who are interested in this topic as well. Our second aim was to improve culturally appropriate dementia diagnostic services. As I mentioned earlier, this is something without these dementia diagnostic services, it's sort of a non-starter. How do you know what you're dealing with if you don't have accurate diagnostic services? Our third aim was to look at what caregiver needs exist in the community. And then our fourth aim was simply to really build a liaison with the other 10 tribes in Wisconsin. As I mentioned, in the absence of funding, what we've decided to do is to move forward where we can. And the easiest one for us to move forward on is the aim 2, to really work at building accurate and culturally appropriate diagnostic services for the Oneida community. And this is Wes. I don't know if you want to talk about sort of the goal here, long-term goal here. We think big here is to bring the research rather than have the community always come down to Madison. What we'd like to eventually do is bring the research to the community.
Yeah, that is, and I think we also need to partner, with the Commission on Aging, elder directors on the reservation, also the clinic directors, which is showing, and along with Glitzy. Wendell Holtz, who is an employee of Glitzy, who is really knowledgeable, along with, as Terry has stated, we're eventually reaching out to, on the national level, Cynthia LeCount of the Older Americans Act director, Dr. Fink, who is also with, in I believe, some health services. So this is not just confined to Wisconsin. We want to reach this out to, and some of our participants from the local reservations, Denise Palmer, and one of the slides that talk about the ages of tribe elders. Denise always points out when she worked at Menominee that the average age of that Menominee's reached was like 48, and so, but the effect of Alzheimer's can start at an early onset, where suddenly realized they could start at 40. There have been things, so that's in the non-union community. So could that be something that happens in any community? So these are things we need to, but again, I guess, is to make sure who's involved, we keep them informed, and they're involved in it. This is not, this is for all of the Native people in Wisconsin. Hopefully this presentation will get that word out that we're trying to do this. We're not, we're trying to reach out to other people that we don't know about, or there's someone we know about it that can continue to participate in this program, but it can be your program, not ours. So I think there is some question and answers in the box there. I can't read them.
So we're getting some questions from various individuals. Some have asked us, Wes, to possibly come and work with their community. I do want to acknowledge Megan Jernigan, University of Washington, is a colleague of mine he's one of these folks that's working on the national level and just doing a really beautiful job making connections to tribal communities in Washington State. And she has really been a sort of a leader in pulling together these individuals working at centers throughout the country. So I want to acknowledge her. Megan asked a question for you, Wes, asking if you could elaborate on how you think caregiving experiences might be different in Native populations compared to the majority population of white Americans.
I would do this. And I'm going to use my daughter as an example in New Mexico because I'm as an elder, and they have traditionally is everything that when the grandparents they will turn their grandparents they will turn everything to the ownership to the youngest daughter, and it's the youngest daughter's responsibility that she has to take care of them elders or her relatives until such time that they might go on to the spirit world. as her father, she has told me that it is her responsibility at times that I cannot take care of myself, that it's hers traditionally that she has to take care of me and her mother and things like that. So, and I find that in Wisconsin, again, we try to keep people in the home. They stay there. They stay with their children or relatives, and and the question of somebody going into the nursing home because of Alzheimer's, because of the lack of knowing what Alzheimer's or dementia is, we think that's just something that comes natural to people, and they should be taken care of. And and I see that in a lot of Native American communities that I visit, that the responsibility is there, that they have to take care of the elders and the children. Them are highly priorities in all of our Native communities. Hopefully that answers your question a little bit.
All right. So that was the end of our slide presentation. I just want to thank the many collaborators here. So the Dorothy that Wes is mentioning is my dear colleague, Dr. Dorothy Edwards, who couldn't be here today, unfortunately, but is a key player in this. And there are many individuals who have helped really support this work by providing either allowing me the time to go do this work and make the connections, and many individuals on the Oneida side as well, in Goodsey. And I think with that, I don't know if there's still time for questions. Julie, I'll turn things back to you.
Okay, thank you, Carrie and Wes. So there were a couple of questions that came in while the presentation was occurring, and we only have a few more minutes, so we'll just touch on those questions that came in. So one question was, how can Wes and Carrie, are you two available to give presentations to other folks in other communities similar to this one?
I believe so. If we can, as long as we know ahead of time, we don't want to say, "Hey, can you come up tomorrow?" We're more than glad, because this is an important issue, and the more people that know about it, especially in the community, I think that's beneficial to us and to them.
Yes, and I would echo the same sentiment. I would also be happy, depending on where you are, if nothing else, I can direct you to local people who are doing this work. And certainly, as Wes and I are doing this in Wisconsin, but there, as I mentioned, a colleague of mine, Megan Jernigan, Dr. Jernigan, is in Seattle, and she runs a quarterly phone call that pulls together others doing this work in the field. So,
but there's another thing is, I think, is if we could, the party that's trying to see if we can come out there, if they could do the similar thing, that I think if we could do this by phone if it's such a great distance. Technology now is great, so I think that if we'd be able to come out there, but again, we'd be more than glad to present by whatever means you had there to allow us to present this, whether it be another webinar or just an individual call to your organization.
Okay, well, I think that perfectly rounds out this conversation. So following this webinar, we will be sending out a thank you email to all of the registrants and attendees. Within that email, we will provide Wes and Carrie's contact information. That way, if you are interested in reaching out to them about possibly presenting in your community, or if you have other questions related to their presentation and their research, you can certainly reach out to them through email. So with that, I would just like to thank Carrie and Wes for joining us today and sharing their knowledge and sharing information about their research project that is in its beginning stages. We will stay connected with Carrie and Wes during their journey and hope to have them present again down the road. In closing, I would like to remind everyone that today's webinar was recorded and that the audio and PowerPoint will be made available online at cms.gov. If you would like a copy of the presentation slides prior to the webinar recording being available online, please email ltssINFO@kauffmaninc.com. That's ltssinfo@kauffmaninc.com, and I can send you a copy of the slides. Thank you again for joining today's webinar. Our session is now concluded.